Wildfires in the western United States are becoming more frequent, they're becoming bigger, and they're becoming an everyday part of life.
The HDRFS project stands for Harnessing the Data Revolution for Fire Science. The idea is to get a lot of data, obviously, focusing on sagebrush ecosystems because that is a huge proportion of the state of Nevada.
Sagebrush ecosystem fires are not well understood and not well studied. In order to get a clear picture how fire behaves, you need to perform test burns, ideally in very well controlled area. Controlled burns are extremely essential for the fire science because you can collect the data that you will not be able to collect during the wildfires.
Okay. So yeah, just make sure that the sampler ID and canister ID match.
Essentially, the HDRFS project up to the burn in its entirety was in preparation for the burn events. And that included everything from the site selection to characterizing the 20 experimental plots for their diverse plant community types and establishing a baseline data for pre-burn measurements that we can compare both during the burns and after the burns as part of our science goals for the project.
So we chose an area where we could find all the major plant community types in the sagebrush ecosystem of the entire West in one location. We had to build a burn barrel, basically metal fences that go around the plot.
Before the burn, we took a lot of pre-fire data because this whole experiment is set up to have sort of control sites and then sites that burn. And we want to make sure that before the fire, the control sites and the other sites are behaving somewhat similarly, or if they do have differences, we can account for those. We had primarily students measuring soil moisture, doing a test called a water drop penetration test, where you literally just take a little eyedropper, put a drop of water on the ground and see how long it takes for that drop of water to fall in. And that's sort of a test of if it rained, how fast could water go into the soil?
Lots of steps were needed to be ready for this burn, and this was across components. So for my part, we had several bouts of measurements of the vegetation at the Red Rock Road 2 study area. In the months leading up to the burn, we measured the vegetation for species composition, what's generally understood as plant biodiversity. We wanted to know what was there before the burn. Also, we wanted to understand how much fuel were on our plots before the burn. Obviously, the vegetation represents the primary fuel that gets burned during any fire.
So my role before the burn occurred is I would go out and I would measure the canopy cover, the vegetation amount in the plots. And I was able to go out in the springtime and the fall time before the burns occurred and measure the soil nutrients before the burn, and then also the amount of organic matter in the soils.
Roger, sending it your way now.
Let me know if we're recording. We are recording. Okay, we're igniting in about 2 minutes.
I just identify the plot which I am going to deploy my sensors. They are collecting the surface soil temperature, collecting the data of deep soil temperature. So we did like a schematic design for the plot before the burn start, and we identify the spot to deploy our sensor location.
What my group did, we installed 12 thermocouples per burn, and we measured the soil surface temperature during the burns. And the idea is to see how the soil changes and how the chemistry of the soil changes during these burns, and how temperature affects the chemistry of the soil during the burns.
The drone instruments that I was able to use, the first was the thermal camera. And so that measures the amount of temperature that you're seeing at the plots. And then the other drones that were flown, they had canisters on them, which were like vacuums, sucking in some of that smoke. And then we'll be able to analyze that later and see what was actually in those smoke plumes. And so if we can understand these small burns, we'll be able to look at what are some ways we can mitigate or change after the burns.
We need to learn how long it takes to recover as well. And so in future, we can predict how this area can behave.
What the experiment is aimed at is to try to give land managers decision-making tools that will be based in science.
There's a lot of livelihoods that depend on sagebrush ecosystems, and so we need to understand what fires do over time, how different fires interact with each other to better live with the fire that's going to be happening despite our best efforts to stop it.
Essentially, the data that's gathered from these experimental burns can help inform them to make better decisions about how to manage fires, how to fight fires, how to inform the public about how fire affects communities. An experimental burn such as this is really informative to translate the science that we gather to these outside agencies or to communities or the public.